You're listening to the Sales Success Stories podcast, where we deconstruct world-class sales performers to provide insights and strategies to help you improve. To learn more, visit us at top1.fm. Here's your host, Scott Ingram.
In this special bonus episode of the Sales Success Stories podcast, we're going to do a detailed recap of the Sales Success Summit and also talk about my vision for the future of the show and some offerings that are connected to it. And to help me do that, I'm joined by Jeff Bajorek and Christie Walters, who together host the Why and the Buy podcast because they found a loophole in the system. So as a listener, I hope you know that I only interview number one and top 1% quota-carrying individual contributor sales professionals. And because of that, I end up telling a lot of people who want to come on the show no, including a few authors that I'm a pretty big fan of who wanted to come on, talk about their next book. But again, I tell them no because that's not what this show is about. But Christie and Jeff were smart enough to pay for and attend the summit as the great students of sales that they are. So when I was looking for some help with the recap, they were perfectly positioned to do that with all the right equipment because they're podcasters and their own experiences to share from their own participation in the first ever Sales Success Summit. So welcome to the show, Christie and Jeff.
Oh, I feel so privileged. I love the fact that we found a loophole.
I think you earned a loophole.
Yeah, I like it. Nice. We created our own.
Isn't that what salespeople do?
That's right. Yes, we created a warp, right? You know,
but we're not breaking the rules. We're working with what we've got. We're trying to make something that happen. We're trying to make something happen that is going to benefit everybody involved. And quite frankly, Scott, you needed a loophole because people want to know about you. And the more that I learn about Scott Ingram, the more I want to learn about Scott Ingram. And it's not fair that you own a podcast and you host that podcast and you talk to everybody about them, but not about you. So a loophole needed to be found. Christie and I were just eager enough to dig one up. So happy to do so.
Fair enough.
Turnaround time. I like it.
Well, I get to start, and I'm going to ask you each a couple of questions, and then I will kind of turn this over. So I just want to hear, Christie, why don't we start with you? I want to hear what was your overall experience of the summit?
So my overall experience was just one of awe. I've been to several sales events before, and some in recent days, even before attending the summit. And being in the room with the individuals that were both presenting and attending was a rare experience. It's not often that you can get that many top performers in the room at the same time, and there's no one there to sell to them. We were just there to learn from each other, and that was just a unique experience for me.
Love that. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, so much passion underneath one roof. You have so many things in common with everybody else in that room, even though you've never met them before. And what I noticed from it and what I really took away from it is that there is something distinctly different about top performers. And often when you're a top performer in an organization, you're on an island. You're being celebrated for being on that island, but you're on an island nonetheless. And you don't often know, unless you're able to get outside of your own company, outside of your own industry, you don't often know that there are other people on that island too. Everybody who was there was on the same island. And I think connections were made for the first time. And a bunch of other people saw some familiar characteristics and some, just familiar approaches. And in a lot of ways, I think that validates the thing that you're doing. Because there's always that little bit of insecurity, like, okay, I'm going off the reservation here. I'm having results, but why aren't more people doing it? And then when you find other people who are doing it, there's validation and then further encouragement again to continue to do that. So I think in that way, this will elevate further the ceiling on what salespeople can do. Because when you separate yourself from everybody else, you don't want to be that far away from the pack unless you're totally going rogue. And I don't think that's really human nature to get that far away from everybody else, except for maybe in extreme circumstances. But now that you see a bunch of other people who are also leading their respective packs, now it's like, oh, no, this is more normal than I thought. I can push myself further. Scott, I think you stumbled on something. And everybody I talked to before, during, after, so energized from this. I think that's part of where that energy comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think the event really was twofold, right? It was that opportunity, just like with this show, to learn from those who are the best of the best. But when you are the best, when you're number one, by definition, you are by yourself. And so creating an opportunity to create community around that was really, really exciting and a lot of fun. And Jeff, you wrote a great recap. We'll put a link to it in the show notes on LinkedIn, just about kind of what that experience was and some of those takeaways that you had. And so we ended up with 10 presentations and 2 panels over the course of the day and a half. If you can, not if, I'm only allowing you to pick one. Which one presentation had the most impact on you?
Christie, go ahead with this one. I'm going to let you go first. I'm going to put you on the spot and make you go first.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Anytime.
I just am, it's kind of like eating potato chips, right? Just picking one is hard. I think because he kicked the session off on the first day, DeJuan Brown's Success Through Service was probably one of the most impactful presentations. And there's a selfish reason for that, I think. I've always looked at sales as an act of service, and I rarely hear... Excuse me, that was not emotion. I rarely hear someone else talk about sales in the same way. And I thought his approach to really getting focused on what the client is telling you. And one of the things that I wrote down on that was that he said, in a society that is focused on holding things in, don't ignore it when someone willingly shares information with you. And I thought, wow, how fascinating is that? How often even our clients are dying to be heard. So I think that's my go-to. Since you made me pick one, that's the one I'm going to pick.
And I knew that you were going to go that way because we may or may not have had a conversation in the last couple of days. I am going to echo Christie in that. DeJuan's presentation was outstanding, and the pressure. Not necessarily the pressure, but the honor of kicking off a success summit like this. You're the first. You're going first. No one's ever seen anything like this. Don't screw it up. I mean, there's a lot that you get an extra gold star for that, DeJuan, for doing that, because that's really, really tough to do, tougher than people give it credit for. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to say that David Weiss's presentation, and not just because he went right after DeJuan, but I've always been a bit of a process guy. And once I found a process that I could hold myself accountable to, it really helped my career. And so to see what David does to approach his territory planning, to approach his activity levels, to do the kinds of things that he does to make him successful, that was really, really good for me to see. Again, kind of validated some of the things that I help people with, validated some of the things that I do myself. And I really enjoyed that presentation. It was a very strong following, particularly coming after DeJuan, which is not, I don't want to follow that guy on a stage. That's for sure.
Well, and in so many ways, I think I lucked out in choosing to put DeJuan first because, and I don't know if it was because of the tone that he set, but there was something about the experience and just the level of humility in the room was beyond anything I ever expected. Any other time that I have been in a room with a large number of top performing salespeople, it has been an ego fest, right? And there's this ratcheting up that sort of goes on. And again, I don't know if it was because of DeJuan or it was just the overall general vibe. The other thing that was just funny to me is at one point I oversubscribed one of the panels that I was building. I'd asked, 6 people to be on my 4-person panel or some crazy thing. And I reached out to everybody, was like, whoops, I totally screwed this up. And to a person, everybody else said, all the rest of these people are smarter than me. Leave them in, I'm out. Mm-hmm. And that was, there was just something about that, whether it was this group of people or the way that DeJuan kicked it off with this feeling of service. It was just so real. Their egos got checked at the door, and we were all there to learn and get better. And it was amazing.
Yeah, the absence of ego was truly fascinating to me as well. And the only thing that I could actually connect that to was the fact that it oftentimes, even in a room of top performers, they aren't really top performers. They're still aspiring, or they're still trying to get to that next level. And so they're still competing with other people in the room. That particular group of people they were top of their game. There wasn't anyone necessarily to compete with or to one up. They were really already sitting there. And so they are already in a position of thinking, how can I give back? How can I do something? Either how can I learn something more, or how can I give back to others in a way that's going to actually benefit them? So it was fascinating group of people, but I think that was a very astute observation.
I also think that lack of demonstrative ego is probably what defines a real top performer. And it could be that we think about top performers as having those big egos because they're so willing to tell us. So therefore, the outliers stand out in the way that they're outliers. When you look at most top performers, they have too much to do. I'm not trying to brag about what I'm doing. I have work to do. And, I saw that on Sunday night. I showed up. We had the little reception, kind of informal. We were at the brewery, drink a beer outside in Austin on a Sunday evening, as beautiful as that one. That was a great thing. But I was watching people leave and say, all right, I got to get some work done because we got stuff to do tomorrow. It's a Sunday evening. It's like 9:00. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the hotel room and I'm going to send some in-mails. There's too much to be going on to pound your chest when you're at that particular level. And I've noticed that about, it's not that they don't like the recognition. I've been in organizations before. People like to be recognized for their hard work. In many ways, that's what they do. But they understand the difference between being recognized by others and making themselves stand out and telling everybody how great they are. And I think what we saw, and Scott, what you have put together, is a collection of true professional top performers. And I don't want this to sound too bold, but I think with the work that you're doing and what we've put together with this summit, we as salespeople are learning about what a true top performer looks like. You can't make something if you don't know what it's supposed to be modeled after. You're creating a model here, or identifying the model rather. Like I said, I don't want this to be too bold, but it really sounds like you're starting to uncover what a true prototype should look like if you want to create a top performer. And that's just cool. It's really kind of groundbreaking. And that's what I keep going back to. If you press me, I believe that's what the magic that's happening here.
Well, and don't you think too that a little bit of that lack of ego came from a place of, as top performers, they're looking to fulfill their own expectations. Other people's expectations aren't enough for them. So there's no people pleasing in the process that you might see in other organizations where it's like, oh yeah, you did that. Well, let me tell you what I did. Right. This was I don't need to please anybody else. I'm looking at my objectives, my expectations, and they're going to always exceed whatever it is you're expecting of me.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I can't say, and I can't add anything to that, Christie, other than I agree.
Perfect. Perfect. So now, Scott, what about you? Was this the experience you were hoping for?
It's funny. A lot of people certainly asked about that, and my expectations were already very high. I felt like, in general, this would be a really hard thing to screw up because I knew the quality and caliber of those that I was putting on stage and those who were going to be in attendance. And if I had no structure and no planning, I think it would have been incredible. Even that said, it really, I think the main takeaway that I had, especially after reviewing the 2.5 hours of testimonial videos afterwards, was just a mind-blowing experience. And I think the net of all of that was expectations were exceeded across the board, right? None of us knew what to expect going in. But I think whatever that expectation was, it was exceeded, including my own. And like I said, I had very, very high expectations of the content, of the experience. But there was something also about the community that was created, right? The one thing that kind of missed my expectations, this will be interesting to talk about too, is the attendance was not what I had originally hoped and sort of set out to achieve. And what's ironic about that is I feel like I worked really hard to market the event for months leading up to it. And it kind of goes to show me, well, one of two things. Either I'm not a very good marketer, which is a strong possibility. I sell to marketers, but maybe not enough of that has rubbed off on me. But I think the more likely reality is marketing only takes you so far. At some point, somebody has to sell something, right? And it wasn't until we got to the last few weeks and I was like, dang, this is not where I needed it to be. And I started to pick up the phone and sell that like things started to happen. And, the other part of this that was really interesting is we didn't figure out the video capture solution, how all of that was going to work until just a couple of weeks before. And so I didn't have the final numbers until a couple of weeks before. When I got those numbers, I was like, oh, crud, this isn't going to work, right? This isn't in the budget. And again, I realized that this wasn't something that I could try and market my way out of. I needed to sell my way out of it. So in a day, I decided, okay, let me try crowdfunding. I've never done that before. Let's do that tomorrow. And I set up an Indiegogo campaign. I kind of seeded it with some friends and family, and then we set it loose. But again, at the end of that day, we overachieved that goal. It was up for about a week and a half before the summit happened. Nearly all but maybe 3 of something like 53 contributions were because of my personal outreach, and I had to go sell it. So there's just something to be learned in that. And again, I don't know if it was a self-fulfilling prophecy or some negative messaging that I gave to myself, but I did work in the event technology industry so that I could sort of see events and learn a lot of things that I could apply to this, because I knew at some point I wanted to pull something like this together. And one of the things that I learned through that process is with the first year of any event, you just have to survive it, right? It's a really hard thing to get buy-in on because it's never happened before. There's no word of mouth. There's no testimonials. It's really hard to set that expectation and let people know this is what you're going to experience. So all of that being said, in so many ways, I think it was a win. I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason and the way they're meant to happen. And the fact that it was basically 1-to-1. The people who paid to be there and a part of the first summit and believed in that vision got an opportunity that I'm sure will never exist again, because they were half of the audience, and the other half of the audience are folks who have been on the podcast. And again, that community that got built and the conversations that were had were absolutely unbelievable. And from that perspective, we will work really, really hard to maintain that type of a culture and that type of a feeling and an experience. But that specific thing, I think, was probably once in a lifetime.
I think so too. Christie and I shared a ride back to the airport and actually spent a little bit of time at the airport together before our flights left, and we talked about that. It's like, yeah, what does Scott have to do to make this happen again? What does he have to do to make this better next year? How does he keep the magic? How do we? And you know what? You may never be able to keep the magic that we had in Austin a few weeks ago. That whatever you create will be magical, but even if it is not the same, that's okay, because it had to happen. And I like what you described there, and we talked a couple of times during the run up to this event, and it was, does marketing work? Well, listen, we know marketing works. Of course we know marketing works, and but it doesn't exist on an island. It doesn't exist by itself. You got to sometimes pick up the phone. And what I love about what you did was that you were decisive. You knew what the right thing was to do, and you found a way through it. You knew all the options that were on the table, and you knew some of the options that weren't on the table. You weren't going to bankroll this thing yourself. You weren't going to write a 5-figure check to not break even on. That was your no-go. And we talked about that, I think, in January. Like, look, I really, really want to do this, but if nobody comes, I'm not putting it on for one person to come in. To do this right is going to be significant. I want to make sure that this thing, this thing needs to happen, but I can't fund it myself. And so to find that people were willing to come, of course people were willing to pay to come to this thing. We had someone there from Toronto. I'm coming from Detroit. Christie was there from Atlanta. We had people from all over the place. There was another guy, James Christman was there. He's in the testimonials video. I know that he's in Chicago. He and I have met in Chicago before. So people were willing to go to this thing because of how great it turned out to be. And it was just about your ingenuity to find a way to make it happen. That's a credit to you, and I think a lesson, or at least something to be noted by salespeople out there. I know you got a marketing department. I know you have all your lead generation campaigns. I know that you've got social media out there. I know that you've got people talking about what it is that you're doing. At the end of the day, you're responsible to deliver that number. Sometimes that means you got to act. Sometimes that means you have to just take ownership of the project and do what needs to be done. Scott, this was all of that in a microcosm. And now look what you've created. Look what you did, Scott. I hope you're proud of yourself.
I love the way you said that. That's awesome. So Scott, you want to talk through some of the presentations maybe and give some ideas to those that maybe weren't there on what amazing stuff they missed?
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we do this? I will kind of outline and talk through the lineup and how it worked, and then maybe we can each share kind of our biggest takeaway or two from each of these. So Christie, as you mentioned, we opened with DeJuan Brown from Bloomberg BNA, and he talked about success through service. And then David Weiss from ADT talked about sales process and building your own formula for success, and went just gave some great visibility into MedPick. There's a lot of interest developing around MedPick in general. I think a lot of more organizations are starting to adopt that. That was the best real world overview of how MedPick sort of fits into an actual sales process I've ever seen. So that was a lot of fun. Debbie Rapson, who just recently made a change, she just started at Sprinkler, talked about digging for gold and the art and science of deep discovery. Kyle Gutzler, again, recently made a change. He's at Teradata now, but when he had this experience, he was at PayScale, and he talked about double your sales income and sales career. And then we switched gears a little bit with a little bit different perspective. So Justin Bridgmohan talked about prescriptive selling and leading your prospective customers through their buying process. And he has a really different take and a different process that we got to kind of look at it and understand. Then Paul DiVincenzo from Cintas talked about accepting your authentic self to win, which I think is just such a critical overarching theme, because all of these folks are so different in who they are and what their process and approach is. And I think they just maximize themselves. Speaking of maximizing themselves, Trong Nguyen talked about how to crack the largest enterprise customers. And he did that by walking us through in detail an experience that he had when he was selling for Microsoft and selling a gargantuan bank and bringing them onto the cloud. And I got a chance to read. He's in the process of publishing his second book. He just wrote Winning the Bank, and again tells that story. And he's just such a great storyteller. So that was a lot of fun. And then we closed day one with Josh Mueller, who talked about the mastery of upserving. So that was day one. And then day two was much shorter day. I ended up doing one less presentation than I thought. And as predicted, we just dug deeper on a panel that I thought would go there. So day two, we opened with Jacqueline Nicholson talking about stand on the shoulders of giants, coaches, mentors, and you. And that was a really
my second favorite, by the way.
Absolutely. Great presentation. And then Mike Dudgeon blew the doors down talking about treating your sales career like a franchise owner. And so Mike's at LinkedIn leading a team now, but he had some again, great stories throughout a lot of these things. And he talked about his early career, trying to improve upon the Colonel's recipe when he spent some time at KFC.
He knew a better way to do it, right?
But he's seen franchises operate and worked with McDonald's as a client at one point, and talked about how you can sort of take that mentality of investing in a franchise and bring that to the way that you manage your sales career, which was a perfect transition into the sales career panel. And that was the change that I decided to make on the fly. I had a couple of open-ended pieces towards the end of the day because I wanted to see what are the themes, what's going to come out of this, and where do we need to put extra emphasis in some of these presentations, or who do we need to bring back onto the stage? So the one change that I made is the sales career panel was supposed to be an hour. I made the executive decision to make that an hour and a half. I think it was a great choice. So Mike Dudgeon came back for that. Debbie Rapson was on that. Bill Pye was on that. Colin Spector was part of that panel. And it was kind of a twofold conversation. The first part of the conversation was really making that decision between, do I remain or choose to stay what I call an intentional individual contributor, or do I pursue some type of sales leadership, executive leadership type of path? And depending on your choice, how do you position yourself best for those things? So if you're going to be a contributor, how do you maximize your earnings? And if you're going to go down that leadership path, how do you take those first couple of steps from an individual contributor role? It was such a great conversation, incredible Q&A. And then we wrapped up with the piece that I threw in last minute, again, based on some of the questions that I was hearing most consistently. And that was a panel around territory and pipeline management. And so David Weiss came back to help with that, the man of process. And I also had Trey Simonton join us, who just has such a great way about setting up the plan for his territory and setting a goal that is some multiple of your quota. So setting your goal at 2x your quota, and how he backed into that, and what his process is, and what that working document looked like. So that was it. Why don't we go back and again talk about kind of key takeaways? We've maybe already touched on Dewan's enough. I think for me, just the theme of Dewan was being selfless and being a servant leader in the way that you work with your clients. Christie, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, just that it was a mindset shift. So there is service to your client, being in service to your clients, but there is also seeing what you do as a service. So there is a mindset shift that I think a lot of salespeople have to make in that respect. So that would be the only thing that I would add there.
What I noticed was a couple of things. The first thing is pay attention. And I've often said this, that if you're in sales, you need to be paying more attention to everything that's going on in the room than anybody else in the room, because you have to read the room, but you have to read the subtleties of the conversation and the environment that you're in. Secondly, this is something you're going to hear me say a lot. So just buckle your seatbelts here. I'm going to say this a lot of times as we run through this. Patience. That came up a lot. So you'll hear me say that again, but almost every presenter was patience. Listen, be patient. Don't force it. Don't rush it. If this guy wants to tell you about his dog, ask questions about the dog. I know we're here to sell software. I know we're here to sell ad space. We're here to sell whatever it is. He wants to talk about the dog. She wants to talk about her cat. Talk about the dog. Talk about the cat, and let the process play itself out. That was big.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. So then David Weiss, Jeff, you claimed David as your favorite. So you've already talked about David, and I already talked about kind of his emphasis on MedPIT. Christie, anything that you had significant takeaway wise from David's presentation?
Here's what impressed me about David is that he was the epitome of consistent, persistent daily action. He had a high touch campaign with his prospects that would rival anyone out there. It was very personalized. This guy knew how to open doors. So that was, I made a couple of quick notes on that and loved some of his creative gift ideas. And just consistent, persistent action with him was the real takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it wasn't just all of the rest of the sales process. He also touched on prospecting as well, and gave some just great gold nuggets in there for sure. Which brings us, speaking of gold nuggets, that brings us to Debbie Rapson, who was talking about digging for gold.
Very well done. That is professionally done right there. That's a professional segue.
Sounds
there,
like
ladies
a professional
and
podcaster.
So Debbie was talking about discovery, and again, my takeaway was, Jeff, I'm probably going to steal your thunder here because you really just set it up. It's sometimes And Paul talked about this later. Paul was talking about sometimes you hear some things in your career that take you years to understand. And I once had a sales leader who would say, because I'm driven and I want to go fast, right? And he would say, Scott, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And I think most of the times that he said that at the time, that made no sense to me. But I think Debbie and talking about the way that she does discovery is a perfect example of that, right? That I know you want to get to your demo. I know you want to tell the client how great you are, but if you will just take a breath and you will spend the time to get to know them and what they're trying to accomplish, everything else goes so much faster because of the way you're able to then position all that you normally would against that and those goals in their process. Christie, what do you got?
So the things that I wrote down for her, I had two key items. One was you've got to build out your questions ahead of time. You have to have a list of powerful questions that really helps you dig deep in discovery. And then the second thing with Debbie, I wrote down was that poor discovery is like selling using a shell game. You are always going to be guessing. And I thought, wow, that's very true. Very true.
Well, and what I noticed, beside the patience thing, right, but is the amount of curiosity that she brought to the table and that she instructed everybody to bring to the table. But not just the, I take my time with this. It was like, no. I'm not just taking my time with this. This is where you as a rookie wanted to pitch. Don't do it. You know that by now. And then later on, it was, this is where you as a semi-seasoned sales pro would want to pitch. Don't do it. And then, 10 minutes later, this is where I'm still asking questions and you are biting through your tongue right now, waiting to pitch your product or your service. Stop it. Do this. It's the very definition of intentional selling through the process. And I'll talk about this, probably get a chance to talk about this a little bit later, what my biggest takeaways was. But when you give every aspect or every step in the sales process the room to breathe, and you don't cloud it with all the other things that you feel like you have to do, when you just set boundaries around those necessary steps, you can execute those steps perfectly. You're capable of it as a salesperson, but if you let everything else get in the way, phones ringing, all these other things, all these distractions come up, you lose your ability to execute in the moment. And she does a brilliant job of protecting those steps in the process. And she said, look, I've got an 83% close rate. And I joked with her after the day, and we were at the cocktail reception. I said, Debbie, if you got a 83% close rate, then you're just not, come on, you're not calling on enough people. She said, Jeff, I'm working through 15 deals at a time. How about you? And I said, touche, can I buy you another drink? It was, here's someone who executes. And with the amount of deals that she's gotten, 15's a lot for anybody to be actively working through. I don't care who you are. If you're doing so by yourself without a team of people to help you with all the steps, that's a lot. And she's crushing it. And despite the fact that she's got all those things going on, she takes spend an hour with each prospect talking about what that prospect could need without pitching. Nobody else I've ever talked to is doing that. It's amazing.
Right. And nobody else you've ever talked to is closing 83% and has been number one every place she has ever worked her entire career. But here's the thing. I think if we dissect the 83%, the reason that is after an hour of her deep curiosity and digging in and understanding everything, at the end of that, she either knows here is exactly how I'm going to position our solution and how everything is going to work, or she knows exactly why this deal is never going to get done, and she walks away. And that's where it's really extreme qualifying. And she has said, and again, this is one of those long view types of things, you might not buy from me right now, because I will tell you can't buy from me because it's not the right solution, but I will sell to you at some point in my career because of that.
Right. Yeah.
I wonder, and I didn't get a chance to ask her this, and I want to have her on our show, but maybe I'll get a chance to ask her this, but I wonder if she would take her next position based on what she could then sell to the people that she hadn't been able to sell to before, right? Like, I've got all these people who can't work with us because of XYZ reasons, but if I go to a company that sells XYZ, I have a ready-made list of prospects with an hour or more worth of credibility and rapport built. Boom, territory up and running right away.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, she's doing it right now. I mean, when we got into the sales career panel, she talked about some of that because she had just gone through that process and finding Sprinkler and making that move. And, again, I'm talking to her in her first week, and she's actively engaged with dream level clients, right? That most people would hear, wait, you're talking to who about what? That's insane. She's been there a week. So that took us to a really big, I think, kind of change in pace, right? We'd been talking about a lot of process, and then Kyle Gutzler comes up and brings just a ton of energy and really just the mindset piece that I think was a good injection at this point, and talked about what the little shifts that he made in his process were to literally double his results not overnight, but over the course of 1 year. And it's not like he was the worst guy and he doubled it and he did okay, right? He was decent, right? He was in the running, and then just obliterated everyone in year 2 and redefined what it means to be number one. Jeff, you want to start us off on this one?
Kyle's very intentional. He's someone, when we spent some time together, we talked on the phone, we had spent some time, we've, conversed since then, but we spent some time at the program too. Kyle is someone who is searching for something, in my opinion, and he's always looking for the thing he's searching for is the way to become the next better version of himself. And I think that authenticity, to borrow Christie's favorite word, is evident. At the same time, he very intentionally made a bunch of small changes, small alterations in his already stout routine. But he is very, very dedicated to what he does, and he's intentional about everything he does. And, it's funny. Here's someone who doubled the sales in a tech kind of world, if you will. And you follow him on Twitter. He's got a couple hundred followers, probably more now by the time this airs than when we're talking about it. You follow him on Instagram, and there aren't that many followers. He's got a lot of followers on LinkedIn, but he's not posting there all the time. Here's someone who fits that stereotype that we all see. He's a millennial working in tech, yet his social media profile isn't blowing the world away, yet he's crushing it. He's dominating because everything he does is intentional, and he doesn't do the stuff that he can't do intentionally. So much to be said about that, and there's nothing that he did, and it's not to take anything away from Kyle because he also did it all. That goes with that should be mentioned. But there's nothing individually that he decided to do that anybody listening to this right now couldn't also decide to do and immediately be an improved version of what they're doing. Kyle's an amazing example of that. And I don't want this to sound like I'm slighting this at all. He's phenomenal in the fact that he was able to do so many of those things. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, and he's extremely talented in that regard. He decided to make that his focus, and the results were outstanding.
Yeah, I have to agree 100%. I wrote down intention and reflection for Kyle. In fact, one of my key observations of the presenters overall was that they had an incredible level of introspection and awareness. So that ability to go back and reflect on what made me so successful. So here the guy is on the plane, headed to his rewards trip, and he's putting on his noise-canceling headphones so that he can write about what got me to this point. Before I lose it, before, I go out and I celebrate, which he did. He went out and celebrated. I want to take a moment and I want to look back and say, what made it different for me? Why did I get this and not the guy sitting next to me in the office? And a lot of that reflection and intention was key in that success for him. He's going to go places. In fact, Tom Singer and I talked to him quite a lot about becoming a professional speaker down the road. He's got a lot of raw talent there, and if he continues on this meteoric rise to success, then you will see him again, and that social media profile will change significantly. I can assure you.
He's got that about that relatability about him. You can't. Not everybody can relate to someone with just smashing success, right? But Kyle has that about him. And just as you were talking, Christie, I was reminded of another conversation I had with him there. He just wakes up and decides to execute. He's like, yeah, I've been on this keto diet. And I said, well, what made you go on this, kind of different nutrition plan? He said, I don't know. Woke up one morning, didn't feel that great. Saw an article, said, I can do that, and did it. and like for 5 weeks was on this really restricted, regimen of exercise and nutrition and all that stuff. Man, sometimes I wake up, I can't decide what shirt to put on. This guy's changing his entire lifestyle for the next month. And there's power in that beyond what people would realize.
Yeah. Well, certainly one of the biggest themes that I've noticed about the podcast, maybe because I force it, but just the level of introspection and self-awareness that folks have. And that's a perfect transition. So Justin Bridgmohan, the way he opened was talking about how he looked back at the way that he had managed his deals over the previous year and what was working and what wasn't working, and what was working and what he decided to double down on that got him to the top. Was he realized I know more than my clients do or my prospects do about my solution. I need to lead them. Yes, they have a decision to make, but I can lead them through that decision, and I can take them through a process where not only are they going to purchase, which is an important part of the process, but here's how they're going to be successful with my solution. And he just kind of walked through that. And I thought it's I don't see that a lot. I think it's a very different approach. And I think there's a lot to be learned from and taken from that. Christie, what do you got?
Yeah, so on Justin, it's always interesting when you look back at your notes like a month later, right? So there were several things that I wrote down for him, and a lot, I believe, was around his conversation with his customer. And he talked about what's the cost of inaction. If you're doing the same thing you're doing right now, a year from now, what will be different? So if you're having a pain, what's going to be different there? And I think that really fits well for the customer conversation. It also fits well for the introspection or reflection that you need to do as a salesperson, is looking at what is the cost of inaction? What's the cost of not making that phone call to that client? What's the cost of not asking that particular discovery question? So it's kind of interesting, the things that I decided to write down for those. This was getting into the afternoon, I think, for that particular session. But they're two very powerful questions.
Well, and he actually went back and looked at his own notes and looked at his own data and ran some reports in Salesforce and said, okay, when I succeeded, I did this. When I didn't succeed, he never used the word fail. I did this. What did I miss? What did I hit? And how did that affect the outcome? Who looks back at their own notes first of all? Whoever does that? Top performers, guys like Justin Bridgmohan, people who are articulate and self-aware and are interested in actually taking the next right step, not just taking steps for steps' sake. I know that keeps coming up. I know I keep saying it. That is the difference maker. And I'm pounding my fist in the air and no one can see it right now, and it's okay. But that was what really taking control of that process from a customer-focused standpoint. Why? This was the note I took. What's it like to be a customer and make these kinds of decisions? Wow, it's not a common point of view.
Yeah. So Paul D then talked to us about accepting your authentic self to win. What's interesting, and for me, it was really hard to absorb a lot of this. I set up my own experience so that I could be there. I mean, I had a professional MC who did an absolutely amazing job and had a lot of other things wired, so I could really sit there and experience this. But I found that there was just too much stuff going through my head, and I was really mindful of everybody else's experience. So what's funny is so many of my other takeaways from Paul are outside of this particular presentation, but I'm going to come back to what I talked about earlier, where he was just talking about you take in so much stuff. There's so much advice and so many recommendations and so many books and so much stinking content that some of it you're able to act on right away and it makes sense. And others of it maybe just doesn't click for years. But I think what goes with that is being a master at distilling this stuff and taking away, because I know of everybody that was in the room at the summit, we all had a completely different experience because of where we are and what we're taking away. I'm sure that those key nuggets we're different for everybody. And that's the point, right? You have to find the thing for you that is going to make a difference in your process. And Jeff, to your point about Kyle, that you're actually going to do. A good idea is only a good idea, right? That's not going to impact your results. What impacts your results is putting that into action. And you can't possibly put all of this into action. It's a matter of finding the things that fit who you are and what fits into your process and embracing those and moving forward with those.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed. I love what Paul had to say. There were some people who didn't quite understand the visuals that he put up there. But then what was interesting was later on, they'd come back and say, I get it now. And it's not easy for everybody to put themselves in that state of mind. It's not everybody to, appreciate someone talking about such an abstract topic. You come in and you want to learn from a top performer about selling, and then they talk about self-awareness and knowing all this stuff. That's not an easy concept for everybody to grasp. But from the standpoint of where Paul was coming from, he absolutely described or presented in a way the authenticity of selling effectively.
Well, you know how I love this topic because authenticity is my favorite word. It is my favorite word. It is one of my favorite words. 1.2
mentions per episode, I think, is the current rate. I look back at Justin Bridgmohan's stats.
Nice. I love it. So, for me, I like this concept from the standpoint of servant leadership as well. Because you can't be a good servant leader if you aren't true to who you are. And people can ferret that out. If you're not being true, if you're not being really you, people know. If you're going to connect with somebody on a real level, they have to be real. And so sometimes being real is also facing fear. It's recognizing failure, and I'll use the word failure. And I don't think failure is a bad word because those are the things that define who we are, defines our success, and there's a level of authenticity there. So I really liked this concept with Paul, and it was more of a feeling. But one of the things that I wrote down around his presentation was that facing the fear didn't mean shirking responsibility. Right. It didn't mean shying away from the fact that things weren't perfect. It just meant moving forward and acknowledging, oh, well, that's there. Mm-hmm. Let's move on. And so coming into that with a client even can make a connection that's hard to get otherwise. There's something that happens when you're vulnerable with people that can't happen if you don't let some of that go. So authenticity is a very, very fun topic for me.
Yeah, great stuff. And again, I mean, I even grabbed Paul after his original episode, and it was so funny. He's like, he talks about how hard on himself he is, and it demonstrated the same day we do our interview. I don't remember if he called me or sent me an email later that day. He's like, when I really think about it, it really just boils down to this. And I was like, Paul, A, I think you're right. That's amazing. And B, you never said that in the hour and a half long conversation we had. What the heck? And so immediately we scheduled kind of that follow-on bonus episode. There was another bonus that I did with Paul, because I really do think that is one of the things that you have to tie this all together, right? The beauty of the show, the beauty of these presentations is you get to see so many different examples. But what works for somebody else isn't necessarily going to work for you. You have to find those things that are going to keep you true to yourself. And I think the passion goes with that too, right? If you can't love your product, if you don't believe in your solution and what you're selling, you won't be able to sell it for that same reason that you have to be authentic, because people smell that stuff. Mm-hmm. You emit this odor. It's like commission breath, but worse, right? If you don't believe in your product,
I love that.
It comes out of your pores, and people are like, "Whoa, it's garlic meets commission breath," and they'll never buy from you. So you've got to have that. So that brings us to Trong Nguyen and how to crack the largest enterprise customers. And the feedback on this presentation was basically, oh my God, that is completely next level stuff. And this is probably the best example that I've ever seen of real world, true global enterprise sales process and what you have to do. It was a window into that world that, these are guys, and Trong is one of those guys who was doing tens of millions of dollars a year in business, and you got to see what that's like. And so for most of us, even Trong in his current role, because he's changed roles since this particular example that he walked through, he has even scaled it back, right? Because he's managing more clients than that. So it's not always applicable, but there's so many crazy nuggets that you're able to pull out of that when you think about, whoa, what if I mapped the organization and the stakeholders in that way and thought about it from that perspective? What would that mean about my ability to connect the value in this particular opportunity and get that closed?
The planning sales calls a year in advance, that's something new. Like, wait a second. He put up a year's worth of calendar and said, okay, in this month I got to do this and this. This month I got to do this and this. This month I got to do this and this with these different people, the whole thing. A year in advance.
Yeah. So I have a unique perspective here because I have lived the majority of my career in the national account space. So I'm used to managing tens of millions of dollars. I couldn't even play in this game. He was amazing at just the level of planning. Scott, you used the term mapping, the relationship mapping that he did for those accounts was pretty incredible. And the beautiful thing about doing or managing something of this scale is that it is not a single person's responsibility. So what you do is you take the challenges of being a high-performing salesperson and take the challenges of managing a cross-functional team and take the challenges of managing high-level politics within your customer's organization, and then you still are able to pull in tens of millions of dollars from those accounts. This is like managing a massive ship and not just keeping it afloat, but keeping it running at top condition. And he had such a masterful way of going about this planning process. So this was really interesting for me because it wasn't about personal performance. It wasn't about how do I change my mindset. It wasn't about all these things that I have direct control over. It was an example of how do you handle things when you have very little direct control and a whole lot of things that are out of your control. But you can manage it because you do, Jeff, plan out your sales calls a year in advance. You have to. How do you get consistent, persistent action on a daily basis with that many stakeholders?
And the charisma that it takes to have all of those dotted line reports and keep so many balls in front of you, so to speak, is amazing. Yeah. This was fun. David Weiss earlier in the day was talking about some of the things, some of the campaigns that he uses to get people's attention and get response rates. And one of the things that he threw out there was the college alumni pack, right? Find out where the person goes to school, buy a coffee mug, send a t-shirt, whatever, with a note, give me a call. He said, I get a 90% response rate. It's not always people want to buy. It's not always people want to move forward. Sometimes they just tell me that it's really not a good fit for them, but I get a response rate. So that got a lot of response, no pun intended, out of the audience as well. Well, then Tron comes up and says, hold my beer.
Watch this.
And he says, I read a lot. So when I read a good book, I buy a dozen copies or whatever for my customer, and I go through and I hand write inside the book, check out page 59, because on page 59, I read something that made me think of you, and I think you'll appreciate it. And he sends that off. And I'm just like, come on. Again, he said, I lock myself in an office, in a conference room for half a day, and I sign books because it's important. And, all the things that are going on, all the charisma, all the dotted line reports, all the different accounts, all the things that they're juggling. Stop. Do this thing because it's important. Lock the door if you need to. Get it done. That level of execution is what makes Trong who he is.
Yeah. Such great stuff. And then I feel bad because I feel like I set Josh up. Last presentation of the day on Monday. So Josh Mueller I think he's number 3 all-time seller at Cutco Cutlery. And his presentation, I think, was a little bit hard because it was much more B2C focused, and while applicable to B2B, maybe just didn't connect the dots all the way for folks. So he was talking about upserving, which is, again, to go with the theme. I thought it was a great way to sort of bring closure to the theme, right? We're all familiar with the concept of upselling, but in his case, it was, look, you're helping people by helping them get the most out of whatever your solution offer is, right? And it has a lot to do with it like almost in the e-commerce world, if you're familiar with that, it's kind of this next best offer kind of thing. Like, oh, well, if you've bought this, people who buy that often like this other thing, and that goes really well. So it's very easy to understand in the B2C context. I think you really had to work a little bit at it. I think the value is absolutely there. You just had to do a little bit more work on your own. And unfortunately, we had already done a lot of mental work by that time in the day to connect that into a B2B world and think about, because his process really started at the point of once they've said yes, once they've agreed, we can do more. We can ask more questions. We can go a little bit deeper. So again, it wasn't like laid out for you on a silver platter, but I think there was some really, really great, interesting nuggets in there if you're willing to do the work and connect the dots for yourself. Jeff, what do you think?
I listened to that very intently, and I saw what he was talking about. And I liked what he was talking about, but I had questions for him afterwards. So that was the last session of the day, and then we went to the happy hour. And I asked him, because a lot of things, I've been caught up in situations like that before, where you want to upserve somebody, you want to give them another offer, you want to give them another chance to buy from you. And when he's one of the things I wrote was the best time to ask someone to buy from you is right after they already said they would buy something from you, and that is 100% true. But in the wrong hands, that is black magic, right? That can get out of hand really, really quickly. And then that's when you fight buyer's remorse. And then how many returns do you get? And so I said, all right, Josh, how many returns do you get? How do you manage that? And he said, okay, this is one thing I wasn't able to get to in my presentation. He said, but the responsibility is on the seller to make sure that they're not getting too overboard. The responsibility is on the seller to make sure that they check in with the customer, with the person who's buying, because you specifically do not want positive psychology to be the reason that they bought. You want to make sure that you're still serving the person, not just selling the person. And he said, I've had 3 returns ever. He's like, this approach allows me to help more people in more ways, but they're always happy. With the exception of those 3 cases ever. And to me, the takeaway was the tremendous amount of responsibility that he takes on himself to do the right thing and not allow him or the buyer to get carried away.
Well, and I think that's true. Given that this is a B2C play, it becomes even more critical to make sure that you're managing your part of this process and you're not getting caught up in the psychology game of it. And I agree with you. In fact, Jeff, you and I think, had a spirited conversation about this in terms of even when you look at books like Pitch Anything, or was that the name of the book, Pitch Anything? It all makes such sense in the right hands. But if you put it in the wrong hands, it creates exactly the persona of the salesperson that all of us hate. And it's that psychology mind game that none of us play. We sell effectively, and we do what our customers need us to do. We don't play mind games to get there. Now, what I thought was really interesting and very, very effective, and I have seen it in my own thought process, and I've also watched others, even solopreneurs, which are kind of, in some cases, can be a B2C type of play, depending on the kind of, if you're working with a coach or something of that nature, where people will get kind of wrapped up in the excitement and kind of swept away with a particular program, and this idea of a buying threshold, that once you've established a certain level in someone's mind, that's the level they will always consider for you. And so people who don't know how to sell on value and will always discount services or products just to kind of get to whatever level they think you're going to buy at are inadvertently cutting their value in your mind, and they'll have to sell that much harder to get you to pay more. So if I, for example, am selling you a coaching package that is
$500,000.
$5,000, $5 million. No, so if I'm selling you a $5,000 coaching package, and but I think I go in and I say, okay, well, this will, for you, I will do $2,000. But then I try to upsell you something outside of that. You've already established a certain threshold in your mind of what value I'm going to bring to you. And so I have to work that much harder and give you that much more in order to get you to a different level. So I thought that was a really interesting psychological component of his presentation. And I think the approach makes a lot of sense. And here's the reality. There are a lot of top performers out there in multi-level marketing, a lot of top performers that are out there in retail that are doing B2C type selling, and they're doing it effectively because they've perfected this concept. So I liked his presentation. And I thought it was different, and it might have fit a certain audience differently. But I think the values, the concept is still valuable.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then we started day 2 with
drinking.
Yes, we did. Yeah, that was an important part.
Well, so the reality was that was always an option, whether people realized it or not. That we were at the Alamo Draft House in Austin. So for those who aren't familiar,
no one did they? No one was drinking during the day.
That sort of amazed me.
I know.
Even though we were pushing the alcoholic shakes that were an option, which as a regular moviegoer to the Alamo Draft House are amazing. I can speak to that firsthand. No, it's interesting. I was worried about that a little bit, right? Like the option is there all day, every day, right? It's full on bar. You've got a credit, go to town. I think just the level of seriousness that everybody took this, and just they didn't want to diminish themselves in any way in front of the fire hose of knowledge that was was coming at them. And so we started day 2 not with drinking, but with breakfast tacos, which were quite fantastic.
Those were amazing.
They were good.
Well, Scott, before you get into that, I want to. We got a little bit of an intermission here, and 2 things. One, on the drinking thing. Not only, a couple people, not everybody, but most people had a drink at happy hour, and that was fun, and it helps to kind of recap the day. And there was a lot of great conversing and networking that was going on. But even at dinner, I think I had a beer with barbecue, which is what you're supposed to do when bourbon isn't available. So I did that, but I looked around, and Scott, you sat next to me. You had like a soda or something. There were some other people drinking iced tea, and there was a lot of restraint that was shown. I think that was significant and worth noting. But while we have the intermission here...
Meanwhile, I was at Uchi Suchi drinking sake.
Yes.
Well, you still showed up on time, so that's not surprising at all.
I did. That's
the
good.
Next day. So, Scott, how did you decide who to ask to present? How did you come up with the format? How intentional were you about who went in what order? Or did you just kind of roll the dice and magic happened? And, tell us a little bit about what went into producing this whole thing.
Yeah, good question. So I think who was presenting was predominantly a function of my favorite podcast guests, right? It was the folks that I personally took the most away from, had the most to learn from, had the best connection with, and so asked them to be a part of this event. What was really hard is I had more folks there than I could put on the stage. And the amount of talent of people who didn't even get on the stage is a little disturbing to me. And it's going to be harder to manage in the future, because if I play this thing out, a year from now, that's 25 more people I've had on the podcast. I could recycle everybody we had 100%. It would be amazing, right? Because we'd all evolve another year, but there's going to be more voices and more input that we bring to this. So that will be an interesting challenge to solve for. But in terms of the program, I don't know. It was a little bit planful in terms of the overarching kind of storyline that I wanted to tell. So I guess it wasn't a complete accident that I opened with Dewan. I wanted to establish this idea of servant leadership in sales, and sales is a service. So that just made sense, and Dewan was absolutely the best person to tell that story and share that story and his experiences. And then I kind of wanted to frame it into a sales process. So we started by talking about sales process and a couple of different ideas on that. And then we started with some prospecting idea. I didn't really have anybody solely focused on prospecting, which is something that I saw as a gap that I'd like to have in the future. I think everybody's questions are about prospecting. Everybody wants to know how they can do that better. So that's something that I will work on in the future. But, we're starting with Debbie and discovery, and then working through kind of the other elements. And then, as you'll kind of see as we debrief the second kind of half day or partial day, it was a little bit more focused on, more emphasis on the mindset and improving yourself and thinking about you are the most important differentiator in that sales process. So how do you improve you and yourself and the way that you execute all of this stuff that kind of rounded it out? And then, like I said, I intentionally left a couple of slots open late on Tuesday. And it was a challenge. I knew it would be a challenge because I wasn't going to figure that out and fill those spots until that morning, because I wanted to see what are the themes that emerge, what are the most persistent questions that are not getting answered, and how do we bring that back and deliver on that. And I will always do that from now on. I think that was so important. It was a little bit harder to identify than I thought it would be going in. I thought, this will be so obvious. I'll know there will be one speaker who will blow everybody's minds out of the water, and we'll want to interrogate them. So let's bring them back, and I'll have the audience be the questioners. I don't need to do this. I've already done it. It's your turn. But it again ended up sort of being that idea of, how do I better manage my territory? How do I manage my pipeline? Was the broader theme. There were also some questions around compensation and managing to your comp plan. We think we touched on a little bit, and a little bit of Q&A, but that was kind of the overall kind of theme. And again, I got lucky, but at the same time, the venue was amazing. Everybody that was on that stage is incredible, and I could have done it absolutely randomly, and I think it would have worked out almost as well.
Well, and what I noticed too was, we get there. I'm on the plane. I'm taking a look at the agenda, and I'm like, oh my God, there's 11 presentations the first day? I'm like, are you serious? These are a bunch of salespeople, Scott. You started us at 8, and we went all the way until 5. What are you thinking? And then we went through it. And the breaks were appropriate. You never had more than 90 minutes in your seat. We ran on time. There was a timer. There was a buzzer. There were flashing lights and sirens when you went over. It was, it was strict in all the necessary ways, and it was loose in all the important ways too. In that you had the ability to raise your hand and ask a question anytime you wanted to. You just had to get out of your seat and go to that microphone up there, and we will not acknowledge your question unless you go up to the microphone up there. And people fell in line, and then it was, hey, we're going to make sure we keep this crisp because we got to move along, because nobody hates a meeting that runs over time. So let's make sure the presenters are on time. And all the presenters were brilliant about, being willing to comply with that and making sure that they got through in a timely manner. But from an organizational and a structural standpoint, you hit all the high notes. And I didn't want to come on your podcast just so I could sing your praises to everybody who already loves you. But the things that you did right were the things that nobody recognizes until they go wrong, and you knocked that ball out of the park.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And it's funny. One of my favorite comments, Todd comes up to me afterwards, another of the attendees, and he says, "Scott, it is amazing to me that you ran this thing 100% on time. And what's even more amazing is that's like the least amazing thing about this."
Right.
That's perfect.
But it is the little things. And, I have been really intentional about this, and I have been studying this for years. There are so many things. I've been to so many events, And I've hated so many events that I've been to for so many reasons. And they're not hard things to solve, right? And I wanted to solve so many of those things so that so that all of that just faded into the background so that you could have the experience. And that's why probably the most important part, it wasn't about the order of the presentations and the structure of that. It was the structure of the breaks. Because every conference I go to, the biggest value is in the hallway. Mm-hmm. And yet the organizers try and cram so much content so close together that you never get to be in the hallway. So that was probably the most important thing to me and we'll extend it even more in the future, right? But this time it was, 5 hours at a beer garden Sunday night as people were coming into town because it was just flexible. It was a perfect Austin scene to begin with. It was outside. The weather was perfect. The Chamber of Commerce delivered on their commit to me that the weather would be Chamber of Commerce weather. But I set it up so that like you could come and go, right? Where you're not forced to do this reservation. You have to be there at a certain time. It was really nice and flexible. And we got a chance to really get to know each other before the event. And then afterwards on Monday, there was happy hour followed by that dine around so that we could be together in smaller groups. And Christie, I love that you got to experience Uchi. Not enough people knew what they were missing out on there, but you got to have that really tight, yummy, intimate experience and just kind of doing that throughout. And as I look to future years, that's how we continue to manage that experience at larger scale is we basically program even more of that white space, which is where the real magic happens. It's not sitting there taking notes from the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know what? I'll save this for after day 2. We'll get to day 2, but I have a question for you that I want to ask, and we'll make sure we get it done then.
Well, let's do it. So just kind of quickly going through this. So Jacqueline Nicholson talked about coaches and mentors. And what's so cool, I can't do Jacqueline's presentation justice because you just have to hear and understand her story. And what's amazing about her story is it happened after I interviewed her on the podcast. The experience that she had where she nearly died, very nearly died, and all that she learned from that and who she was through that and her why. I mean, I'm talking to the hosts of the Why and the Buy podcast who are all about the why. Mm-hmm. Jacqueline's why will make your head explode. Mm-hmm. And so I that's all I can say about that. For me, it's a much more just emotional takeaway around who Jacqueline is and what she stands for. So I don't have a bullet point on, I learned this particular nugget. I'm sure there are those, but her story is just incredible.
Yeah, so I'm gonna lead this one off because this was definitely my number 2, and only because you made me choose. And it was the emotional connection to her story that was really powerful. But she also had a really incredible message about the value of your inner circle and the value of the people that you surround yourself with, the value of the people that push you to the next level. And she even put, I took a snapshot of some questions that she put up on the screen about the questions that you can ask about your inner circle is what gets me to the next level? Who am I surrounding myself when I'm there? Who can I trust? Who can tell me the tough things? And what's my unfair advantage? And I can guarantee there are a lot of salespeople out there that might be listening to this podcast right now. They can't answer some of those questions. Mm-hmm. They don't know what their unfair advantage is or who they can trust, or is there someone in their inner circle who really does tell them the tough things? Because those are the ways that you actually grow. This was a powerful, powerful presentation. And I even told her afterwards, I said, you could have done that as a keynote at a Sales 3.0 conference. You could have done that as a keynote at, a conference that had 10,000 people in attendance. This was very powerful, both from story and from message perspective. So Jacqueline I was very impressed.
Well, and that dose of perspective is necessary because we talked to top performers for the better part of 2.5 days. And not everyone was willing to share with us their why. I didn't ask everybody because I wasn't there to record a podcast, right? But, she shared with us her why, and it just reminded everybody in attendance what all of this is for. You can talk about the hows, you can talk about the whats, you can talk about all of those things that everybody did that separated them from the rest of their peers in their companies and really even in their industries. But this is what it's all about. Because you know what? Even though I was a top performer, even though I am a top performer, I almost wasn't a performer anymore. So let's just take that step back. And it's almost cliche to use that. So I'm even hesitant to use that in my kind of breakdown here. But she just had a powerful message to say. And the way that she was able to be so compelling and say, you know what, I live in wine country and I drink great wine on a way more regular basis now because I appreciate what it's all about. And don't forget where you are right now. And don't forget the people you surround yourself with. And yeah, it got me thinking. And that's what I like.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, and there were parts of Mike Dudgeon's presentation. So again, Mike was talking about managing your career like a franchise owner, but there were pieces as he got into that I thought were so well connected in the way that he followed Jacqueline, because he had a worksheet that I need to go ask him about because we still need to put that up as a deliverable. But he has kind of a process to think through your personal board of advisors was one of the pieces that he has. And as somebody, I mean, if nothing else, between that and Mike being on the sales career panel, my takeaway was, my God, if I ever had an opportunity, I would love to work for Mike. He is just one of those like truly amazing leaders. And just a year ago was managing the Microsoft relationship for LinkedIn before that acquisition happened, right? Mike was podcast guest number 1. So it's been just a lot of fun watching him evolve through this career and work through his own journey as now a leader. And, the way that he asks people to, I'm going to forget his word, but IDP, individual development plan, something like that. I may not have the letters right, but that's the first thing he's asking from people and having them be mindful of, great, we know where you are today because I just hired you, but where are you going, right? What are you going to accomplish over the next couple of years, and how are we going to measure that? And just checking in on that. So he is a complete anomaly and unicorn in that he's delivering that for his team. The rest of the time, all of the 99% of the rest of us have to take that into our own hands and really be mindful and think about, where do I want my career to go? Here, this is the role that I'm in today. This is the territory that I'm in today. And here are the things that I'm doing to maximize that opportunity. That's great. But where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? And what do I do now to begin to position myself to do those things? And he had such an amazing take on the ROI of a salesperson. And again, I don't want to give away some secrets because there is just some gold nuggets in there, but just the way to think about the ROI of yourself and the relationship that you have with your organization was super powerful for me.
I talked to him after the presentation, and I think it's kind of funny because I know he was up there as a salesperson and making his presentation from the mindset of a salesperson and talking about, taking ownership, right? Something that I talk about with clients a lot. Christie, I know it's something you talk about with your clients a lot, accepting the responsibility for what it is that you want to have, or that you want to accomplish. But I took it from the manager standpoint because I know that's where he is right now, and the resources that both he and his company give to their employees and their salespeople. Where do you want to be? Okay, it's my job to help you get there. It's not my job to whip on you about delivering a number. It's not my job to call you every Friday and ask you how many calls you made. It's my job to help you get where you need to go. And so brilliantly, to your point, Scott, that you made the tip for him to follow Jacqueline in that order. It was like Jacqueline saying, this is the importance of having a tightly knit group of people around you to help tell you how it is, to keep it real, to let you know where you're doing great, even though you don't think you are, and where you're not doing so great, even though you don't know that you aren't. And then for Mike to come up and say, as a manager, this is how I enable my people to take the next step. And I actually kind of demand that they take that next step. I hold them accountable to their own goals. That's my job. I'm their manager. and he's like, I have positions available. I'm like, I'm going to send you my resume, right? Like, he's the kind of guy that everybody wants to work for. He's the kind of manager that everybody wants to work for. And, I'm like, man, do I have to move? Like, wait, what do we have to do? It was just, those kind of people are that inspiring. And he's one of those guys. And it's, again, a mindset shift. Why can't everybody manage that way? Well, they can, but he's got to figure it out. And that was what stuck with me. But, I know his presentation was supposed to be kind of more from the salesperson standpoint. And I was asking him these questions afterward. He's like, were you listening to the same presentation? And I said, no, that's just what I took from it. And so I don't know if Christie recognized the same thing or what your feelings were.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Mike, I had several conversations with him at breaks, and I'm confusing what I heard him say in his presentation with what I heard him say in our conversation. He is one of the few people I have met in my career that truly embodies everything servant leadership. Everything that comes out of his mouth is driven from a servant leadership perspective.
Scott's head is vigorously nodding.
Yes, exactly. Right. Because you get it. And it's almost like there was this Zen master in the hallway waiting to just absorb all of my my observations every time I ran into him. I was very impressed with him. In fact, I was joking around with one of the other attendees that just wait, take a picture of him, keep his name, kind of like Kyle Gussler, right? It's just wait. He's going to do something really massive, really big, very soon.
And probably wouldn't tell you about it either. I mean, that was the thing that I noticed. I barely noticed him.
He's completely humble.
He just he was always, I was like, wait, you're with us. I thought I saw you in the hallway, but I wasn't sure you were with us. And then, throughout the couple of days, and I hadn't had an opportunity to interact with him. He was one of maybe 3 or 4 people I didn't have an opportunity to really just talk to, before his presentation. Then he gets up and I'm like, oh, that's that guy that I was there with but he was just so unassuming and just taking it all in. And he had a lot to talk about and has a lot to share and a lot to offer, but it isn't right out there throwing it in front of people. It was just, no, yeah, I'm here. I'll get my turn. I'll get my opportunity.
Yeah. Jeff, that was good recognition. I think as I think about it, that is absolutely the presentation, for the sales leaders. And I'm going to correct you called him a sales manager. Mike is a sales leader.
Okay.
He's a leader.
Yes.
And I think that, if you're a sales leader listening to this, or you want to recommend one of these videos for your manager or your leader, that's probably the one to send them out. I think they will take so much away from that. And again, it's one of those, here's somebody doing it at the highest level, and we can learn so much from that, versus I did that 10 years ago and then I started writing books. It's a different animal. So that takes us to the sales career panel, where we get to talk about Mike some more. I've actually seen, this is so funny, I saw the rough cut of the panel, and I was heckling Mike a little bit and said, that thing that happened during the panel, those who aren't in the room will never know it happened.
That's too bad.
Because I got through it and was like, oh my gosh, it was funny. It'll be an inside joke that those of us who were there, that's one of the things that we get to take away from. So Mike was on that panel.
Perfect.
Debbie Rapson was on that panel, and Debbie just very recently went through her own process. And Jeff, I think you were in the Q&A asking, she threw you for a loop. She just went through making her own transition. So it was so fresh. And she had, I always feel like this, managing a transition in sales is a sales process, and you need to manage it like that. And she's a master. And so that's what she kind of went through. And then the perspectives, really everybody, it was so neat to have pulled this panel together the way I did. So Mike was an individual contributor for a long time, now in a sales leadership role. Debbie has worn both hats, mostly as an individual contributor, but she did work as a sales leader, grow a team. Bill Pye, I think, has spent more of his career as a leader than as an individual contributor. And when he joined Cornerstone On Demand, it was with the intention of, I'm happy to step into this role for a little bit, but we are all expecting that, very shortly we'll move into a leadership role as that becomes available. It became available, and he said, nah, I'm real good right here, right now, making this kind of money. Thank you very much. And then Colin Spector was the other end of the spectrum, where he joined Namely as an SDR and went from SDR to senior SDR or AE, senior AE, now is leading a team in Southern California. So to have kind of that entire gamut of perspective. And like I said before, kind of the two questions were making the choice between being intentional about being a quota-carrying individual contributor or going down the sales leadership path, and then how you react to each. And it was just a blast for me because I got to ask a lot of the questions that I think about a lot. And a lot of it was just kind of validating the decision and the decisions that I've made and am making, right? It's not a point in time. It's kind of an ongoing thought process. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys took away from that panel, because it was lengthy.
It was great, though. There was the interaction between the panelists. There was an interaction between you and the panelists. There were some really good questions that were asked. It was just the panel discussions are great if they're executed properly, and this one definitely was. The thing that sticks out to me, how chill everybody was. How patient everybody was. Even when you're talking about things like territory cuts, like comp plan changes, like all the stuff. Listen, list in your head right now the top 5 things that salespeople complain about. And everybody on that panel is like, yeah, it happens. Keep working. And the rest of the room just kind of, well, yeah, you're right. And that is, that you can't overstate the value of that. Because there's going to be stuff that happens outside of your control, and you're not always going to like it. And Bill talked about it. He's like, I'm pretty sure that comp plans have been changed because I destroyed them in the prior year. And you know what? That's going to happen. I guess I'll just bust this next one too. Paul D said something. He wasn't even on the panel, but I remember talking about that afterward. And this panel was exemplary of that. The thought process of, what do I really want to do? How do I get there? I'm going to have to make some trades in order to accomplish those things. But if I really want to do them, then what's the sense in complaining about taking the pay cut to go to manager? What's the sense in complaining that my territory was cut because I made an obscene amount of money last year and the company wants to continue to grow? If I'm doing my job, then that means I should be able to do it again. And I've seen a lot of reps really kind of rail against that in the past. Wow, they changed the commission structure. They did this because I just did so well. It's like, okay, well, go do it again then. Don't be a one-trick pony. And everybody up there just kind of, they took everything in stride. And before I kick it to you, Christie, I want to, this was just something I noticed, and I think this is the best time to bring it up. I spent some time with Bill Pye on Sunday evening. I spent a little bit of time with him at happy hour on Monday, and then I watched him up there on that panel. That man brought the blood pressure of the room down just by being in it. We were out on Sunday. We were some of the last few people there. We weren't out too late, but we were out some of the last few people there on Sunday, and there's music playing and we're outside and he's speaking in this really low tone of voice. And I'm like, I just really wish he would kind of speak up a little bit, and I got to pay closer attention and everything. But then I spent more and more time with him, and then his tone of voice never changed. His demeanor never changed. Everybody came down to him. I don't even know if he realizes that he does it, but it's magic what he does. And when you're talking to him, you're just calmer, you're more in sync, you're more in step. And as a leader, that is intangible and invaluable. As a salesperson, if you've got it, then it's amazing, and make sure you use your powers for good. But there's such, I hold him in a lot of reverence for that, and he commands that, and he deserves that. But those are those little intangible things. Like, he's just there, and it's deliberate, and it's measurable in how deliberate it is. And the effect he had over the entire room was there. And I don't know if you can, Christie's nodding her head. Maybe she won't, maybe she'll throw me a line here and rescue me from this diatribe I'm going on, but
I think you nailed it though. So Bill was very interesting for me too. I actually had dinner with him on Monday night, so I did get a chance to spend some time with him socially, and he was one of those individuals. And honestly, there were several people that I met throughout the time that we were there that I didn't realize the level of impact they had in their organization until they got up and spoke about that level of impact. And Bill was definitely one of those. So I had dinner with him Monday night. Tuesday was the panel. And then I had a couple of people sitting next to me going, oh yeah, did you know this about Bill? Did you know this about Bill? And it was like, I'm going, wow, I was like sitting next to a rock star. I didn't even know it. So yeah, there's a really, he's a force. Yeah. There's a force to be reckoned with for sure. So to go back to the panel conversation, I thought this was a great panel, and I have some specific comments to make about the next panel as well. All four of these guys were pretty amazing. This was a great interaction with the audience too. So you had a lot of people getting up and asking questions. And I loved the fact that I loved the juxtaposition of sales, being a sales leader and being an individual contributor. And the fact that everyone there had both perspectives. Yet half of them were sitting in leadership roles today and half of them were sitting in individual contributor roles today. And it really just depended on, had more to do with the organization that they were currently with and whether or not it served their overall purpose. And I think that what I took away from all of this was it was not about the particular company's compensation plan, was not about the particular company's product or service. It was about their overall purpose and objective in their life and their career. And was this the right path for them? So if compensation plan wasn't working for them anymore, you go find one that does. If the product or service that you're selling isn't working for you anymore, then you go find one that does. You don't sit there and complain about it. You just go find the place you want to be. So that was my takeaway.
So that brings us to the last panel of the day. And I don't know if you call two people a panel, but this is where I brought David Weiss and Trey Simonton up to talk about territory and pipeline management. And this was one, Trey in particular, he was one that, again, was just there. I didn't have a plan for him to be on the stage, but I knew what he brought, and I knew that he would add a lot of value to this concept. And so, he's like, yeah, we got about 5 minutes to start. Let me just roll my treasure chest onto the stage here, and I'll just whip out gold nugget after gold nugget after gold nugget for you. So there were so many just quick, poignant, easy takeaways. In particular, I think the one that Trey shared, and I think he shared this on the podcast, but just the reiteration. No, maybe not. He got some coaching from another very good friend of mine, sales leader friend of mine, Tony Capasso, about, hey, look, you're a great salesperson. He watched him in action, right, in a meeting, and he's like, you're great. All the things that you're doing, they're all right. But the each time that you are ready to talk, bite your tongue and leave just a little bit more space. And he had a formula for doing that. It was, 6 times every 30 minutes and, 9 times an hour, or whatever the number was. And and he still does it to this day. That was years ago. And he will show you, he'll open to any page in his notebook and show you his tick marks where he's actively measuring the fact that I left a little bit more space so that I could give the person that I was in the room with just that little bit more processing time to make that very next comment. And amazing things come out of those moments. Yeah. I mean, and Debbie talked about, biting your tongue before you go to pitch, right? And Trey kind of echoed that, but especially, how many times are you looking for that opportunity to pounce? And salespeople are impatient. We got a lot of stuff to do, right? There's a lot of things going on. He said, just bite your tongue. And it was 6 times every half an hour, or it was 5 times a meeting, or it was whatever the number was. If people would just go buy the videos, then they'd probably learn what that exact stat was. But the patience again, and it wasn't just be patient for patience sake. It wasn't just be patient because you don't want to be rude. It was the gold happens when you can get that customer, that prospect, that client
to continue to roll. They're rolling, and it almost bookended perfectly, right? Because Dewan had started day one by talking about ask the other question, take their lead, use the client's momentum. It sounds bad when I say that, but if they're going in a direction, don't try to reroute them. They're opening up to you. Let them go. And then the Trey come back and say, yeah, I bite my tongue a couple of times every meeting. And it's amazing what happens after I bite my tongue. That would never have happened if I tried to step all over the sales call by trying to sell something. And I mean, think about that. And that was really, really cool. And that was worth its weight in gold right there for sure. And then for David Weiss to get back up, grab the microphone and talk a little bit about, with more specifics about how he approaches and uses MedPick to go and, with his targets and the long range planning and who he needs to talk to and who he needs to target. And that was in concert really nicely with what Trey put up there, a sample spreadsheet of his. And, we've got a lot of fancy tools out there. There are CRMs galore. You're not lacking a technological help for what it is that you're trying to do. But sometimes all you need is the basics, and all you need is a spreadsheet to keep yourself organized. Sometimes, and Trey pulled out a journal. He's like, I still use a pen and a paper, guys. It's amazing what can happen if you just kind of put the fundamentals to use. But what they both kind of echoed, and they kind of chuckled a little bit back and forth, was like, here's my pipeline. Here's my target list. Here's what they're all worth. Here's the value of them all. And there was never a mention of quota except to laugh at it. So you got a lot of salespeople who talk about quota. You got a lot of sales authors, a lot of sales leaders say, forget about your quota, just go to work. And if you get the job done, then your quota should be an afterthought. And those I'll take and I'll pick up and I'll put them over here to a little space on my right. Then you've got the top performers who say, okay, not that I definitely shouldn't worry about quota, definitely shouldn't pay attention to quota, but you want to know what? Quota's not enough. How many salespeople say my quota's not enough? These guys are like, well, wait a second, my commission accelerator hits here, my bonus hits here. What do I need to do? Well, my target then needs to be sky high. So you take the 4-to-1 rule, right? You're on average, say good salesperson is going to close 25 to 30% of their deals. Fine. So if my quota is $1 million, I better have 4 in pipeline. Well, my escalators and if I maximize my comp plan at 2 million, then I need to have 4 times that pipeline in there. And if I've got 4 times that pipeline in there, now we're talking about an $8 million pipeline. Listen, if you've got an $8 million pipe, you're going to hit your $1 million quota. And so it was a completely different perspective on ignoring your quota. It was quota is an afterthought by January 15th. It's how am I going to hit the escalators and all that stuff. And that was the most, I think, productive or beneficial explanation of being money driven. And that was kind of a theme that kind of went throughout. Not most of those salespeople are driven by the financial aspect of being in sales. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially when they frame it in this way. It was like, look, if you're willing to pay me to do that, why wouldn't I go do that? And why would I even consider being distracted by a number that's far below what I'm capable of delivering? It's about accountability. It's about integrity. And it was a really healthy discussion about money. And what's interesting is how many people I talked to afterward who are like, wow, did you hear these guys talking about how much money they want to make this year because they know they deserve it? There's a completely different perspective on that. A lot of people struggle with that. I would consider myself to be one of them at times. Other times I'm pretty gutsy about what I know I'm worth. And sometimes I'm just like, really? For real? And I think a lot, even the top performers struggle with that or have struggled with it. And there were a lot of healthy white space discussions in the hallways and in between sessions and things about that, Scott. So, Christie, what did you notice about, Trey and David's, kind of, their panel, their pseudo panel with just the two of them up there?
Their pseudo panel. Yeah. So what I noticed was, one, how much people were interested in the territory and pipeline management discussion. I think, Scott, that's definitely an area that'll be, we can explore, or you could explore deeper next time. The level of organization that Trey had in his deal horizon was fascinating to me. I just thought the nuggets were just constantly flying around in that panel. I thought there were a lot of interesting tidbits, but that was one that I actually wrote down. So
that's what I was thinking too.
So Scott, I love the way you produced this event. I love the thought that you put into it. Like I said, you got all the things right that nobody notices unless they're gotten wrong. So it's thankless work. And so I'd like to at least shed some light on that. But one of the things that I think was brilliant of you to do was to make sure that this thing was professionally recorded. You and I talked beforehand. A lot of people did not have expense reimbursement for this. A lot of people did not have the availability to leave. And it's a 2-day commitment. And you did it as well as you could. It was the first Monday and Tuesday of a new month. It was springtime in Austin. We missed the South by Southwest, traffic and the crowds and everything that went away with that. Austin's a beautiful place in May, but some people just couldn't go. This thing was captured. This thing is available. This thing, every single one of these you want to buy the videos individually, you want to buy them in a package of 5. I mean, you really put some thought into getting the little things right when it comes to the video. How can people who couldn't attend access these nuggets, access a little bit, maybe not all of the inside jokes, access some of that magic that was there? There's really no substitute for being there in person. And we'll talk about what's coming on the horizon with this group of people and with this kind of event. But how can people still grab some of what was experienced there in Austin a few weeks ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is still a little bit of a work in process. So what I will say is the first thing you should do is make sure that you're on the mailing list, because if you're on the mailing list, you're always going to be the first to hear about these offers that come out and best offer. And by and large, I really try not to send an email more than about once a week. So it's not like I'm going to abuse your email address and bombard you. But you can go to top1.fm/2018 videos, and we'll have the purchase options there. The reason I say this is challenging is right now, we're probably recording this about a week before it will release. The first, I think, 4 not episodes, that's not what they're called. The first 4 presentations have been produced. So we're maybe a quarter of the way through. More will start coming out next week. I'm going to continue to sort of inch up the pricing on this. So the sooner you do it, the better the price is going to be, right? Those who participated in the crowdfunding campaign and pre-purchased the videos, they got the whole series for $150. We're probably going to about $250 for the full series. But if you're getting in now, I don't know, maybe it'll be a $199, something like that. So the sooner you take an act on that, the better. The other thing that I'm going to do is, for everybody that's already on the mailing list, for everybody that joins the mailing list, I'll let you pick the session of your choice for free and give you access to that video. So you heard us outline all of them and what's available. Find the one that you think is going to be most impactful for you. It's a great way to just get access to it right away and get that takeaway and just see the quality. It's really, really incredible work. I invested pretty heavily in the production. It was a 3-man crew, so 2 camera guys, an audio guy. I mean, they did a great job. The editing is fantastic. So I'd encourage you to go in and act on that. And again, the sooner you do it, the better.
Awesome. So what did you learn? And what is the thing that you've learned most from interviewing these top performers and these top 1%ers, if you will? I mean, maybe that's an episode all to itself, but I mean, what did you learn about this experience? What are you going to tweak next time? What is on the horizon for what you want to do with these types of events?
Yeah, that's like another hour-long episode, and we're already quite a ways into this. I'm gonna set the what have I learned from all of these interviews and from the event sort of aside. I think that we each take something different away, and I really do hope. I think the level of value and just the uniqueness. There's not another place that you're gonna get 10 presentations, 2 panels, 11 hours of content like this, all from top 1% sales professionals. I want this out there. I'm still working some other sponsorship angles. It's possible that we end up making this entirely free for everybody, but I wouldn't wait for that. It may not happen.
Right.
You need to experience this yourself. none of us have experienced anything like this. There's on that 2018 videos page, on the show notes page for this episode as well, I will put up, we somehow boiled the 2.5 hours of testimonials down to sort of a short 5 minutes that were a little bit more specific to the videos, just so that you can see the reaction of the folks that were there. It's incredible. It's palpable. And Jeff, you actually star in that video twice. You did such a great job. You made 2 appearances. But you've got to take this stuff for yourself, right? It's about incorporating it into your own process. So sure, I could give you highlights. I could give you the stuff that I took away. Frankly, I have to go back to the videos because of what I talked about earlier. It was really hard for me to experience this and put on the Scott's a sales guy who carries a bag, and how am I going to bring this into the way that I manage my territory and the way that I manage my career, and not have that lens of, I hope everybody's having a great experience and being so mindful of that, right? So let me set that aside. In terms of what comes next, let me outline kind of the big picture roadmap that I have in mind through 2019. There's really 3 big projects that I'm working on, and we'll talk about the impacts of each. So the first one is there was a secret gathering on the Wednesday after the summit with a handful of those who had been on the stage predominantly. One other mentee of mine who was part of the summit, because I needed a canary in the coal mine to just kind of validate the stuff that we were talking about to make sure it resonated with really the heart of the audience, right? And we're working together on a book. And this was driven, I've done it before. It was a really fun project. I wrote a book about event marketing, and I cheated because I had 12 co-authors, and I wanted to do something similar with this. And it was a comment that Robbie Siegel made before we went into our interview. And Robbie was, dozens of episodes ago. But I was just giving him the backstory of the podcast and talking about, look, it's not sales experts, it's people who are actually doing this stuff. And he's like, yeah, Scott, that's because we were talking about, I read all their books. And he says, well, yeah, that's because people in our position, we don't have time to write a book. Like, that's just not possible. And I thought, you know what, that's wrong. This is possible if we distribute the work enough. And what's funny is I went into this brainstorm idea with the idea that we would hopefully come up with kind of the working title. And I had a couple of ideas, and maybe I'll share those ideas here in a minute, that might fit, but I didn't want to taint the process. I didn't want to pollute that. I knew we would be coming right off of the event, so we would have those themes, we would have those questions. So it was really, what's the big umbrella that this all fits under, and what's the gap in the sales book marketplace that we can address? So I thought, I still think these are pretty good ideas, but I thought our title might be something along the lines of, I had 2 kind of big ideas. One was sales as a service. So this idea that it is about kind of servant leadership and that approach, I thought, that might be kind of interesting. And the other one was, I think fundamentals never get old. And so the other thought was something along the lines of, sales fundamentals from fundamentally great sellers, something like that. What's funny and what came out of it, though, was, and it took and I recorded this, so it was really fun. I actually went back and listened to the conversation. We figured this out in 30 minutes. We have this conversation, and very quickly, they sort of distilled down and were like, okay, well, Scott, the gap in the marketplace is the reason you started the show. There are no stories from real salespeople. And, all of the books out there are so instructional, like you go out, you do this, this is the process, this is what you're supposed to do, here's some data and some anecdotes and some, we did research or whatever. Okay, fine. But the gap is those stories. And then they're like, Scott, why don't you just call it sales success stories, and we'll all contribute stories about our sales success.
Might be onto something there.
Oh my God, talk about not being able to see the completely obvious. So that team is already at work. So far, I think I'm at 8 18 commits, and we're early. That was 2 weeks ago. We're at 18 commits for folks who will be contributing probably 3 to 5 different stories. And the idea is we'll figure out some way to assemble it in a way that makes some sense, where there is a bit of a story arc. But I think it's also beautiful in that you could flip to any page and there's a story for you. And again, it's different people, different industries, different points in their careers. And I think we remember stories better than we remember, do A, B, and C. And knowing what the impact of that was and what that meant. And then again, being able to bring that into our own process. And this is something that we can repeat over and over. I think the second volume is going to be based on the questions that come out of the first one. So really excited about that. The other thing that was fun is I'm working with a group of mild overachievers. My thought was, we'll publish this in, probably January, first part of 2019. And they looked at me funny and said, Scott, are you serious? Dude, we can have stories for you like in June. Why can't you publish in September or October? I saw, okay, well, there's no reason I can't. I've done it before. I have all of the resources. Game on. So the first thing that you'll see is probably mid-June, we will spin up another crowdfunding campaign to sell kind of early purchase to the book and early insights into that process. So I'm really wanting to involve the audience in the process as we're bringing it together. So being able to preview some of that content, and we'll be creating it in all of the normal channels. There will be an ebook, there will be a book on Amazon, there will be an audiobook on Audible. The other thing that will be fun, because all these guys have been on a podcast now and they know how it works, this will be a book read by the authors. So everybody will read their own stories when we create the audio version. So I love that. Super excited about that. That is a really fun project. Some folks have committed their stories like within the next week, and I'm just chomping at the bit. I can't wait to see what they look like and to start bringing that together. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then I'm looking at 2 events in 2019. The next Sales Success Summit in basically this format, I'm actually looking at in October. And the things that I'm thinking about changing, I think we go back to essentially the original vision for this event, which is filling the largest auditorium at the Alamo Drafthouse. So we're still looking at an event with less than 200 people. I think there will absolutely be an opportunity to sell a lot more tickets than that and drive a much, much larger crowd. But I still want to keep this intimate and figure out some ways that we're able to scale it over time. So some interesting things happen in October in Austin. One, Austin City Limits is now 2 weekends. And I think the initial feedback, I've had debrief conversations with maybe a third of the people that have been at the summit at this point, and with the goal of talking to them all over the next few weeks. The feedback on the Monday, Tuesday format has been, that was awesome. Let's do that again. So I think what we'll probably do is hang it off the back of probably the second ACL weekend. So if people want to come to Austin on Friday and do ACL and then come join us on Monday, that'll be an opportunity. And we'll put people together so they can experience it together. I think we also, I don't want to change the core length of it. I think a day and a half is enough. People have been asking for more. I'm going to pull a Steve Jobs here and say that you don't know what you want. I think I have a better idea, because heads were already full, but we will need more of the white space and more opportunities to connect, especially with a larger audience. So I think what we'll do is we'll formalize, it was a little bit informal, but we'll formalize the Friday evening kind of gathering that happens beforehand. People are coming in on Sunday anyway. That works great. Monday will basically be the same, full day of presentations, happy hour, dine around. That's all good. Tuesday, though, I think the content remains the same, but rather than just waving goodbye at 2:00 on Tuesday and sending people to the airport, I think it will be very valuable to have people hang around, plan to leave first thing Wednesday morning, and use that afternoon spot to I kind of just want to build some mastermind types of groups. So don't know how that'll come together exactly. It may be based on topic. It may be based on question or experience or something along those lines. And the other thing that happened, and this was ridiculous, and it was just complete happenstance. I got an invite from a friend of mine about 2 or 3 weeks before the event for a private house party fundraiser that he was hosting at what used to be Sandra Bullock's house here in Austin, with some iconic Austin musicians who were basically going to do a jam session. And my first response was, that's funny. I'm in the middle of a summit. There's no way on earth I'm able to do this. Sorry. And I thought about it for 5 minutes and went, wait a minute. No, this is Tuesday night. And I've got people that are staying because of the Secret Wednesday meeting. Why don't I just offer this up to folks? And so about half dozen of us or so were able to attend that. And it was unbelievable. And I'm pretty sure I can replicate it because I know the guy who ran it. And, that's a year and a half out. We can pick a date. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll bring all of that together and continue to drive that experience. So you've got book, you've got Sales Success Summit 2019. And the other thing that I want to do, and I'm targeting this for the spring, and the reason I want to do it in the spring and not the fall is because there are hurricanes in the fall. And the May concept is what I'm currently calling the President's Club Cruise. And the idea here is, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the Sales Success Summit at sea. A lot of the format is the same. But I've now worked for 2 organizations that were too small to have their own President's Club. Like, it would be weird. Like, oh, Scott and Linda, go to club, have fun. Like, that's just odd. And so I think there's a big opportunity in kind of that small mid-market company space to create sort of a cooperative club where you can send your top performers, you write one check to Scott, we'll recognize your people, we'll reward them, we will show them one heck of an experience, but at the same time, we are going to surround them with amazing talent and their stories and a lot of kind of what we built with the summit, so that when I send them back, they will basically be lit on fire and ready to do it all over again in the new year. And I think this also works well for the larger organizations that have club to just turn it into a quarterly contest or something like that, right? Send your top 3 people from Q1 to this event, and we can build just a really, really great dynamic. So the idea is, we're exploring options right now, but these things you have to plan about a year in advance anyway. So we're right about there and starting to pull together some of those options. But this is likely sort of a 4 to 5 day cruise type opportunity. Kind of the first and last day of the cruise would be content, and the middle is just, let's enjoy ourselves and have a really great time. So those are the things that are in the works and where kind of the future vision lies.
What I like about the cruise idea and the President's Club cruise idea is that most people, a lot of companies in the clubs and trips that I've been on, it's like, wow, that was a really nice trip. If you want to go on again, if you want to go on something like that again, it'll be different next year, and just go sell a lot more again. And, after a while, that's not the only reason. Well, we've clearly distilled that. That's not the only reason top performers perform. So when you take your top performers and you give them more fuel, not only the recognition, but more fuel to continue at that pace, now you're starting to ramp up. Now you're starting to build something. Now you're starting to, you're exponentially increasing their potential there, because you're limiting that audience and then giving just that select audience the ability to do that. And now you're creating a culture where that's really encouraged. And to your point, celebrate them, recognize them, and then light them on fire so they can do it again. You said that a couple of times during the weekend, Scott, or during the couple of days. It felt like a weekend during that couple of days, and it's totally appropriate, and it's exactly what a President's Club should be.
Yeah. Well, and again, at the end of the day, if you look at what we want, right, we're in the field, we're selling. And I've said this from the very beginning, like, us sales creatures are very simple beings, right? We have 2 buttons you can press. You can press the cash button, please press it. I like it very much. But we also have this recognition button.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that recognition button is bigger, and very rarely does anybody know how to press it. So one, we get to do the recognition, but perhaps even more important than all of that, those who are performing at the highest levels, we want to grow. We want to get even better, right? We're never done. And so having this environment, because again, the reason I did this event is because there's not anything like this for the individual salesperson. Where do I go to go get better and surround myself with amazing people? more or less doesn't exist. I mean, yeah, maybe there's a couple of ideas, but not to this extent. And it's so needed and it's so desired. What's interesting, and this will be a conversation that I'm having for a long time, is just the disconnect though. And I started to have these in the sales conversations, quite frankly, that I was having towards the end, talking to people about coming. And it was one of these, well, I would expect my company to pay for this, right? They pay for everybody in every other department to go to their big conference. Let me see if my company will pay for it. And I think by and large, the reaction of the organizations was, well, we already pay you a ton of money. Like, you should be able to pay for yourself. And there's just a disconnect in the marketplace about who owns the professional development of sales professionals.
Yep.
That sounds like an episode in and of itself.
Yeah, I think we developed about 3 of those. So maybe I'll see you on the why and the buy.
Yes, absolutely. I love that.
I think you just closed a deal, Christie.
I love that.
Scott, and maybe we can save this for the episode of the why and the buy too, but I mean, does your wife still like you? Are you guys on speaking terms? You got like several, you're writing a book, now you're going on a cruise. Hopefully she's coming with you. You got another event you're planning. You're going to these fundraising dinners. You're in listening to live music, and you're putting on these shows. You still sell for a living, right? I mean, listen, I don't think it's too much of a stretch, and I don't think I'm throwing you under the bus here to let people know that the Sales Success Stories podcast is not how you pay your mortgage, right? So how do you manage to hold that all together and still keep the people who are really important, to you in your how do you stay in their good graces?
Yeah. So, for me, and yeah, this certainly isn't paying any bills. It's just trying to pay its own bills right now. I mean, this is, I talked about this a lot during the summit. I mean, this really is a labor of love. This is a passion project. I think there is a big future down the road, but for now, I'm quite content just delivering the value that we are. I feel like my superpower is kind of twofold. One is I have been working on sort of my own organizational process that I've been refining for the last 10 or 12 years. And it's a daily process that I do every morning that helps me triage all of the priorities and all of the commitments and things that I need to deliver across all of these things, right? It's with my family, it's in my day job and in the quota that I carry there, and it's with the podcast and the events and some of the other things that we're working on. That's part of it. The other part of it is also just surrounding myself with amazing people. And this show and this event now have really brought some incredible folks out of the woodwork who have just said, Scott, I love to death what you're doing, and I will do anything that I can to help. And so, I continue to kind of look for roles and opportunities for them. And I have one heck of a resource team around the podcast. I mean, I'm certainly not doing my own podcast editing and a lot of behind the scenes on that. A lot of the logistical event production stuff, I worked with an amazing partner called Attendee Management Inc., AMI, to do a lot of that. They built the registration page, all of those things, right? So it's like anything else, right? It's about managing priorities. It's about managing the schedule, and it's about executing on priorities and what's most important. And if you do that and you stay focused and you stay disciplined, you're able to pull it all together.
Awesome. It's I'm glad that we were finally able to find a loophole to get you to be a guest on your own podcast. I still don't know if we found a way to interview you, or if you just kept asking us the questions. We can't beat it out of you, Scott. You are who you are, and we love you for it. Thanks for doing such great work. Thanks for being a top performer, and thanks for getting all these top performers in the same space at the same time to help each other become even better at what they do. I can't say it enough. What you're doing is a game changer for the industry. And I walked away from that. And Christie, I think you echoed this too when we talked. I walked away from that event with more pride in my profession and in my vocation than I ever have before.
Yeah. I just want to. I couldn't say it better than Jeff has already done so. But I think having the passion to put this project together. This isn't just about making the sales call. This is about being committed to a labor of love. And Scott, we really appreciate you doing this. I'm so excited that I got a chance to participate and be a part of it and to watch history in the making, in my opinion.
I'm looking forward to the next few events.
Well, thank you both so much for being a part of it and committing so early. And I will close with, again, just thanking you and suggesting that folks who can't get enough of this, although, oh my God, I think we may have set a new record in the length of episode on my podcast, which that is a pretty high bar. But if this isn't enough, right? If granted 2-hour conversations aside, if what I'm able to put out on an every other week schedule isn't enough for you, the conversations that Jeff and Christie are having on the Why and the Buy podcast are fantastic. And I think we will have a couple of follow-ons here. I always love chatting with you guys. I always get a lot of value out of the conversations that we have on your show as well. So folks should absolutely subscribe. And we will have links to everything like we always do on top1.fm. And I will put this under, how about Summit? Oh, that's too many words. Just go to top1.fm, but it'll be, Summit 18 recap or something like that. We'll find an easy way to get you there, and we'll have all of the details, links to Jeff and Christie and their podcast, and how to get yourself the videos and get on the mailing list so I can send you at least one for free so that you can take advantage of that. And I'll have another great one for you next week. Actually, I can tease next week because it is already in the can. And one thing that you could do, what you may want to, what I'd suggest is ask for the Sales Career Panel as your free episode, or just if you don't buy the whole series. It's not an episode. What is it? Anyway, with the video, that one, most bang for your buck, because that is the longest by a factor of 2, because the conversation that I'm having next week on the podcast is with the top sales recruiter at a sales recruiting firm. And so we talked about his regular journey like we always do on the show, but then on the back of that, I also asked him some questions about how we as sales professionals can be working with recruiters and really how to maximize that opportunity and position yourself for growth in your career. So great stuff to look forward to. Thank you all for listening. Christie, Jeff, love you guys.
Awesome.
Back at you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for doing what you do.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for listening to the Sales Success Stories podcast. To be sure you never miss an episode, and for an invitation to our sales success community powered by Influitive, subscribe to our newsletter at top1.fm.